Welcome to the Bookshelf Odyssey podcast. In this podcast, we talk about books, interview authors, and we discuss their journey to becoming published. Each one has a different but amazing story. My hope is to encourage people to keep reading good books and to help authors find their audience and inspire everyone in their journey, whatever that might be. Welcome to the Bookshelf Odyssey podcast. Welcome back to the Bookshelf Odyssey podcast. My name is Art, and I'm your host today. I have a special guest with us today. Her name is Wendy Sand Eckel. She's the author of the Rosalie Hart Mystery Series that tells the story of a farm-to-table restaurant, and the occasional dead body shows up. Sounds like a wonderful mystery series, and Wendy's here to talk to us all about it and her writing journey. So, Wendy, welcome to the Bookshelf Odyssey podcast.
Thank you, Art.
Well, through the miracle of technology, we are able to connect even while you're on vacation. So thank you. Thank you for giving up some of that precious time. Well, I like to start off getting to know our guests a little bit. And the best way I find is to ask you what you're reading lately and what would you have to recommend to us?
Well, that's interesting because I'm in the middle of writing book 4. And when I'm writing, I really don't read. It takes me away from my own writing and my own inspiration. Although there are some books that I have on my desk that if I'm feeling kind of stuck, I will pick them up for inspiration. I have some classics. I have To Kill a Mockingbird. I have Charlotte's Web. I have East of Eden. I have Stephen King's On Writing. I love all of Anne Lamott's books about writing and the writing process. And so if I'm starting to feel stuck, sometimes I'll just shut my computer and kind of read the first page of some of my favorite books. I'm a big Barbara Kingsolver fan and that kind of thing. And then it kind of grounds me and I get inspired by, the wonderful prose. And this story is set at Christmas time. The one I'm writing right now is called Killer in a Winter Wonderland. And it was interesting because my husband read A Christmas Carol over Christmas, but he'd never read it before. And he would read me passages from it that he found inspiring. So that really got me in the mood to get going on this book. It was really fun.
What are some of your favorite books of all time that you've read? Which is an unfair question to a bookworm, I know, but
Right. That's interesting. Well, the ones that I've said already.
Yeah.
When I went to graduate school, I didn't read at all either. And I went on vacation with my family this summer after I graduated, and I just, my brain was fried. And we were sitting in this beach house in North Carolina, and I looked at my mom, and she was an avid reader. She was a professor at Kent State University, but her summers were spent reading mystery series, reading anything she could get her hands on. And she was holding Barbara Kingsolver's first novel, The Bean Trees. I looked over and she was sobbing. And I'm like, Mom, what's going on? She said, oh, this book is so good. This book is so good. And I said, all right, hand it over, because she had just finished it. Hand it over, and I read it in one day. And I was like, okay, I'm back. And I started reading again. And it was her first book. And my gosh, her writing just keeps getting better and better. But it was such an emotional book, and I was so touched by it. And so I cried when I finished it. Then I passed it on to my sister. And so that really got me back into reading. But I mean, I really do love a lot of the classics, but I love books that make me feel. I want my books to make people feel something, lots of things. I love books where I get immersed in the character and the story, where I laugh, I cry, I care about the protagonist. And I think one of the most inspiring books for that was, not to date myself, but it was Pat Conroy's Prince of Tides. That book was such an emotional book. And it just moved me so much. I mean, he had a way of describing the landscape that was poetic. And I felt that, and it immersed me in this story and this family. And I felt so much. It was a very compelling story. So when I think about when I'm writing and I want to hit all the senses and I want people to feel that, I think about that book a lot.
I was just looking for the title of this one book I'd read. I can't remember the name of it now. I
told you that would happen.
I know, yeah. It's the name of somebody. I thought it was Barbara is missing or somebody is missing. And it's a mystery, but the main character is an older woman who has Alzheimer's. So it's like the unreliable narrator and kind of the ultimate unreliable narrator. But it's written not as a gimmick. It's written with such compassion and tenderness, and understanding, and also deals with the trials of being that age and what happens to you when you're starting to have Alzheimer's. And I think after the first chapter or two, I was already in tears, and I'm like, oh, this book is gonna be it's gonna be a cry fest.
I'm trying to remember. I think I read that book. Was she a teacher? Was she a college professor? And one day she showed up to her class and was sitting in the audience instead of teaching it. Is that it?
I'm not sure, because
I
it's
read
been a
one
while.
like that.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've read it. But the mystery she's trying to solve is that her best friend is missing, and she thinks it was a crime, and she's trying to solve this crime. But then because Alzheimer's is setting on, she can't remember all the details of the mystery as she's trying to solve it. And
oh my goodness, that would take you some strange places in your brain. That's fascinating.
Well, if I think of I'll find the title, and I'll make sure to link it in the show notes or something there. But
yeah, listen to both of us talking about Alzheimer's and not being able to remember the titles of
the books. All right, this is bugging me now. I might be able to find it real quick. Oh, Elizabeth is Missing. That's it. The book is called Elizabeth is Missing, and it's by Emma Healy. And it's again a mystery she's trying to solve, but with Alzheimer's, it's hampering that. And the whole book from beginning to end, it's just an emotional journey that was really, really powerful.
I'll have to pick that one up.
Talking about books that make you feel, yeah, that made me feel all the things. And like I said, after about the first couple chapters, I was just crying for this poor woman.
That must be some good writing then.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to give spoilers away, but it was well worth the read, I thought. If you want a book that will make you sob uncontrollably, there's one for you.
I'll have to be in the right mood.
Yeah.
Sometimes you want to cry.
Right. It's one I wouldn't mind reading again, but I'm not sure I want to put myself through that. So
I have a few movies like that where I'm guaranteed to just sob for the last 10 minutes. And sometimes if I flipping through the channels and I see it, it's like, okay, I'm going to watch this.
Yeah. The musical Les Mis was like that for me. After we watched it once or twice, and my wife finally tells me, you got to stop watching this movie. It's not good for your mental health.
Oh,
look
there are
look
some.
Look at that little girl. She's crying, Yeah.
Les Mis was my was my daughter's favorite movie and soundtrack. And when she was in high school, we'd say, okay, it's time to go do your homework. And then all of a sudden we would hear Les Mis blaring through the house. And we're like, is she doing her homework? Does she need that to do her homework? Or is she doing her homework? But we just let it go. It was every night she'd go up and there we'd hear Cosette singing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, okay, we gotta let her go with this.
Got some dramatic moments. Yeah. Right. That's the power of good storytelling for sure.
Agreed.
Now, when did you know you wanted to become a writer? Was that something you always wanted to do?
Well, I always loved reading. I was always pretty good at writing. I got a master's in social work, and I worked at a couple runaway shelters. I was a family therapist, and I worked in a psych hospital and an adolescent unit for a few years, and eventually moved to the Eastern Shore of Maryland in a small town. So I started up a private practice. So that was thriving. And my youngest daughter was in second grade and was diagnosed with dyslexia. And I thought I knew a lot about it being a social worker, but I really didn't know much about learning disabilities at all. And so I really had to immerse myself in trying to find everything that I could do to help her. She had reached second grade, and they say through second grade you learn to read, but after that you learn by reading. And I got a little panicky that if she doesn't learn to read in second grade, then she's going to be catching up a lot and a little lost. So I found some programs to help her, but apparently I was a little too disruptive in this little private school that she was attending. And at the end of the year, they said that I was too disruptive and made too much trouble. And like my daughter likes to say, she got kicked out of school in second grade. So she says that all the time now. So yeah. homeschooled for a year. She
Mm-hmm.
went to see a language arts specialist in the afternoons, in the mornings, and then I worked in the afternoons. And I just realized what it was, a very traumatic experience for all four of us and my family. And but eventually we found the right school for her. We all had to move to Annapolis, and but we found a wonderful school for her, and she thrived and learned everything she needed to learn. She's reads beautifully, she writes beautifully, so it was the right thing to do. But after that year, and we finally got her in a school where I didn't have to work so hard, um, I thought I want to write about this, and I was going to write about it as a professional social worker, but it didn't work. I tried to write nonfiction and I just couldn't do it. And then I thought, well, why don't I write this as a novel and write about a family with a dyslexic child? And it just came right out of me. It was the easiest thing I've ever written.
Mm.
And so I realized then that this was something I love to do. And I
Mm.
like to write and touch people and get messages across, and that kind of thing. So, but that was published on a print on demand in the early 2000s, and I sold it at. I would go to dyslexia conferences and sell it, and it was great because people would come up and tell me their stories. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember one woman came up and she said, well, her daughter had just been diagnosed in kindergarten, and so she bought every book she could that we all do about dyslexia. And the first book she picked up said 80% of the prison population is dyslexic. And so she started to cry right in front of me and said, my baby's going to prison.
Oh no.
Yeah, so it's really an emotional thing when you have that and you can't get the help that you need. So I wrote that book, and so people would buy the book, but one woman bought the book, went up to her hotel room to start reading it. She came back down and it literally fallen apart in her hands. The
Oh,
glue didn't stick, and the pages were falling out. And I thought, so I think it was that day is when I thought, I'm going to be traditionally published from now on. That's just, I'm not going to have pages fall apart in someone's hands. And so
right.
I wrote a sequel to that book. And I found an agent I pitched at a conference, and I had an agent pick me up, and it was a big New York agency. But the woman who was assigned to my book quit like 3 months later and said that this was a very difficult place for her to work as a woman, which I was very supportive of. But then my
Mm-hmm.
book fell through the cracks. So, it was like, I've actually had 3 agents in my career. That was my first. And they call it being orphaned. And
Mm-hmm.
I was orphaned with that one. And then I wrote a mainstream literary that won the best novel contest for the Maryland Writers Association. I could never sell that. And then I think it was like, okay, I need to find a genre that's marketable and I can still write the way I like to write, but it's something that I'm going to be able to get published. And so that's when I turned to mystery.
What I love about the mystery genre, and really many of the other, kind of subgenres, you can explore those big themes like you can in just a literature or in a fiction story, but then you add the extra element of, mystery or science fiction or whatever. And it always, I don't know, to me that makes it even a little more accessible. Maybe it's just because those are the stories I like, but like Elizabeth is Missing, it's a story about Alzheimer's, but it's also a mystery story, and the two combined together just really pull me into the story. And so, writing mysteries, doesn't always mean, well, I have to give up, writing about these other things. I can incorporate them into the story or whatever. And
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. It's a vehicle, really. I mean, I
yeah.
love writing mystery. I really do.
Mm-hmm.
It's so much fun. But my books have a cooking theme, and so it's almost self-indulgent that I get to write about what I love and still write, stories that I love to write, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. So you write a series about from farm to table, kind of cooking. What is different about that than, say, your I don't know if say your typical restaurant? I don't know if like McDonald's has ever been anywhere near a farm, but what is farm to table cooking?
It is when the ingredients are sourced locally as
Mm-hmm.
much as possible. There are certain things. It's usually the menu is seasonal, so you cook what's available in that season,
Mm-hmm.
and you try and use as many local farmers and cheesemakers and everything you can find, dairies, as you can. And that cuts down on greenhouse gases with the transportation. You're also supporting your local community, and the food is fresher. And so
Where I live, we have a lot of rural communities, and we have a farmer's market on the weekend, which when you're in places like downtown Des Moines, that's like a big street party. You know, there's musicians, there's vendors, all these things everywhere. But out here, it's literally just some people all lined up in the street in the back of their pickups, selling their produce. And it's boy, the taste, the flavor, everything is so much better. And somebody suggested that I buy local honey, which there's a store near us that sells local honey, and that helps with allergies. And I don't know if I've noticed any difference, but it sure tastes good. So I'm going to try it.
Say, because the bees pollinate the things that are giving you allergies. Yeah. So I think that there's scientific evidence for that, but yeah, it's hard to know how much it's really working.
Right. I get bad allergies. It'll be allergy season soon, so I'm bracing myself. But
oh yeah, we have it in Maryland right now. Everything's blooming. The cherry trees have popped, and it's like, oh man.
So your mystery series is set in that kind of a world of cooking from farm to table. What can you tell us about the series? What is it about? Who are your main characters, and what sort of shenanigans do they get up to?
Yeah, I've written 3 so far. Mystery at Windswept Farm came out in August 22, and I have 2 more coming out. The next one should be August 23. We'll see. I'm writing as fast as I can, but I really like to get it right. So we're my editor and I are just kind of waiting to see what happens. And she's very flexible, and I'm really lucky to have her. But the first one, it's all the same characters, and my character ages, everybody grows, everybody changes. But she is living in Chevy Chase outside of Washington, D.C. with her husband, and they've just taken their only daughter to college, and she's planning a little getaway because they're empty nesters, and her husband phone tweets, and she notices he's got a text, and then she asks him about it, and he says, I can't do this anymore. I've been seeing someone else for over a year. And so she gets out of Dodge as fast as she can. And she had an Aunt Charlotte who, her mother's sister, who lived on the family farm on the eastern shore of Maryland and had died about 2 years ago and left everything to Rosalie. And she ignored it for as long as she could, not knowing what to do with a big farm. And then she retreats to that house after she finds out about her husband. And so at first she's lost as can be. And within the first few days, she finds a dead body floating in the marsh grasses in the river that are farm borders. And then she also meets the farmer who had been leasing her aunt's lands. And they have a very prickly relationship in the beginning, but they become very close. And he says, I've always been farming organic. And she says, well, tell me about it. And so he starts farming, he gets the farm back in shape, and she's really lost, but she starts baking bread, because that's what she and her aunt used to do. And baking bread is not just about putting a loaf of bread in the oven. It's about kneading, and it's an emotional experience. It's a very tactful experience. And so she starts baking bread. It's her therapy, and she beats it up a lot in the beginning. She actually was listening to Les Mis in one scene, and just abusing the bread, getting out all her emotions.
Yeah.
And then she's tried, giving it away and then selling it in town in a little shoe store, and starts to fall in love with cooking again. And for Rosalie, it's a way to nurture others. And in the meantime, she's solving a mystery, and she finds a friend in a writing class, and then he helps her. And at the very end, there's someone, I'm not going to give away the ending, but someone suggests she opens a cafe. And so that doesn't give away anything. And so in the next book, she opens a Daylily Cafe in the small town of Cardigan, Maryland. And that restaurant is farm to table. And they use as much as they can they end up getting chickens because they want to reach a sustainable status, not just organic, but move up. It's an upgrade to go sustainable. And it involves having, farm animals. And so she did all her eggs for her cafe. And so the next is set in the cafe. And then in the third, talk about indulging what you love to do. In the third book, she gets a chance to study with an Italian chef. And he's one of her best friend's cousins, and he's on vacation from his 3 restaurants in Tuscany, and they just happened to meet, and he offers to host a 5-day cooking school in her cafe. So she gets 5 other students, and so there are 5 days of Italian cooking. That was Marco Giovanelli is the chef, and there's a mystery along that's just juxtaposed with the cooking class. But I just had so much fun with the research. With about 6 or 7 years ago, 4 girlfriends and I went to a cooking school in Tuscany for a week, and it was one of the best vacations I've ever had in my life. They called it a cooking vacation. We did get to cook, but then we'd all go back to our villas while they put everything on the table, and there was wine, and we just had we had an authentic chef. But so I wanted to take my protagonist to Italy, but it's a cozy mystery, and so the setting is so crucial to the story that you have to keep the character and the setting. So I thought, well, I'll bring a chef to her. And so everyone says when they read it, it makes them hungry. So I had so much fun writing it.
I love those books that make you hungry. I love cozy mysteries, and my favorites are the ones that are set at like a restaurant or cafe or bakery or coffee shop. Those are the best. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's always an antagonistic sheriff, although that relationship has an arc to it too. By book 4, it's changed a little bit, but he's always surly, so he's always coming into the cafe and demanding coffee, and she always makes him his coffee.
Yeah.
So there's a lot about coffee.
And so the first book in the series is called Murder at Barclay Meadow.
Yes, Barclay Meadow is her aunt's farm.
Okay. What inspired you to combine cooking and solving crime? Was it because of your love for cooking?
Absolutely. There was no question. The cozies need a hook, and I thought, well, this is a no-brainer. I mean, I'm happiest when I have a house full of people, family, friends, and there's a ton of food on the counter. People are just grabbing food and eating and laughing, and I see it as a way to nurture and love the people that I love. That makes me extremely happy. So to be able to nurture my readers in the same way, by engaging the senses and writing these meals, and it's just so much fun for me. It really is.
But do you think that food can tell a story as much as, say, words can, maybe differently?
Oh, absolutely. You nailed it. In fact, this is what I'm really trying to do in this 4th book, because I get so many newsletters from Epicurious, Bon Appetit, New York Times Cooking, and I read every single one, and oftentimes there's a dish that has a narrative to it. And so I'm really getting into like food narratives. For instance, there's this, the Negroni is a really popular drink right now. And so there's a story about a bartender in Italy was making a Negroni for a customer. An attractive woman came in and he got distracted. So instead of putting gin in the Negroni, he put in Prosecco. And so now that is a drink. And I'm here with my friend who is Italian. And she says, you're saying it all wrong, Wendy. I call it a sabagliato. She said I can't even do it. It's a GL. It's I can't even do it. She said, you're saying it all wrong, Wendy. I'm like, okay, sabagliato or something like that. But anyway, so it's a drink. And so I was in a local bar with my husband, and he ordered a Negroni. He gets his with tequila. And I was asking Tia, I said, do you know how to make this? And she goes, oh my God, yes. And so she brought it out. But here's this cocktail that it's bagliato means mistake in Italian. And so, so here's a story to this drink. And then I was reading another story, which I put into this current book about fettuccine Alfredo. And everybody thinks fettuccine Alfredo is just like heart attack on a plate. It's made from heavy cream and all that stuff, But apparently there was an Italian chef in the early 1900s, Alfredo Fiero. I'm not going to remember his last name, but his first name was Alfredo. And his wife had just given birth to their first son, but she was very weakened by childbirth. And so he comes up with this dish to make her stronger. And when she's feeling better, she said, this is going in our restaurant. This is going on the menu. And so explains how he made it. And there's no heavy cream at all. He makes, homemade fettuccine with semolina wheat. And then he takes a little pasta water, tons of melted butter, and starts mixing that together, and then add new grated Parmesan cheese. fresh, like new, not old, aged Parmesan cheese. And he just starts tossing and tossing and tossing, adds to pasta. And the more you toss it, it becomes creamier and creamier and creamier. And so that is what fettuccine Alfredo is. And so he started serving it in his restaurant. But what he would do is he was very theatrical about it. And while he was tossing, he would be moving around and dancing and entertaining everybody, tossing it away in the air like a pizza. And everyone would be entertained by this. And in fact, there's a brass spoon and fork on the wall. So the restaurant still exists in Rome. And Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks went all the way over to go to this restaurant in Rome just to watch this guy. And so they gave him a spoon and a fork, and it says from Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks. And so there's this whole story to this dish that we take for granted. You go to Olive Garden, you get fettuccine Alfredo. Yeah. But so I love that. It's just what you were saying. Like there are so many things about food, and they have a history. Dishes have a history. Why people eat them, how they, So I'm very into that right now. So I'm glad you asked. That was a really good question.
Cool. Well, great. Sometimes I come up with a great idea. Yeah. One thing I'm learning is, through talking to authors and things is that there are different ways to tell stories, whether it's through words or pictures or music. Why not food? Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Although I kid you not, my stomach just growled. So I'm thinking about fettuccine Alfredo now.
I know.
Oh, man. I wonder what's for dinner. What is it that you love about telling a story?
One of the things that somebody said, what's your dream about writing? And of course, what getting published was huge. That was top on the list. But one of the things I've always said is, I wish that someone's reading my book and they read a passage and they dog ear a page. That it touches them to a point where they dog ear a page. I love evocative writing, as you know. I love to engage the senses. I'm in two critique groups, but I have this one woman who writes poetry, and when she's reading one of my scenes, she'll say, "Where's the light? Where's the light? Set me in that scene." And it's always such a good question. What time of day is it? What's the weather? Just set me in that scene. It only takes a sentence or two to ground your reader in that scene. I think that's really, really important. But so I was doing a lifelong learning class, several lifelong learning classes that have asked me to come and just join their members and talk about writing, and just like we're doing. And so I was asked to do one, and the woman that was going to interview me said, "Can we chat the day before?" And I said, "Sure." In fact, she actually lives very close to Fort Lauderdale, and I had lunch with her yesterday because we just hit it off so well. But anyway, she was telling me how she'd been going through a really hard time. Her mother had died from Alzheimer's right before lockdown. Her husband died of lung cancer right before the lockdown. She got her second cancer and had a horrible time, but she's fine now. She's totally clean. And then her best friend died of COVID in the first few months of COVID. So they sent her my book, like they sent you my book. And she said, I got to tell you, when I got your book, I thought, I haven't read a book in 3 years. And so, but she went out on her porch and she started reading, and she said, I read that one. I read the first one, and I'm midway through the second one. And she said, I hadn't been able to read a book in 3, almost 4 years. And when she told me that, I was like, wow. And I've had 2 other people tell me that. One had lost her mother and she couldn't read a book for 2 years. She joined us for lunch yesterday too. I have another woman that lives in town who had lost her husband suddenly after 45 years of marriage, said she couldn't read a book until she read mine. It had been 3 years. So to me, that's what, if I want to, why do I write? That's why, when these women tell me these stories. And I kind of ask myself why that is. And I think it's because when they read my books, they can trust I'm not going to take them somewhere they don't want to go. Hopefully I'm going to take them on a really good ride, that it's fun, that it's exciting. They get hungry. They get worried about the mystery. There's always a reveal scene that I always try and make very tense, but they know I'm not going to take them somewhere they don't want to go. And so there's almost a safety, and most cozies are like that. But I feel like I think my readers trust me. Like I try and establish that right in the beginning. The opening, I mean, I'm really big on the first page. Like, while we were reading this Christmas Carol, I read the first 2 paragraphs and I was like, oh my God, he just wrote these 2 paragraphs, and I was like, I'm all in. I'm going
Yeah.
on this ride with you, like,
Yeah.
and so when I started this book, I agonized for 3 weeks before I wrote the first page. Like he just invites you in and you're all in. Like, I'm going, I'm with you, Marley is dead as a doornail. It's just like,
Hmm.
it's like, okay, I'm hooked. And so I finally came up with the first two paragraphs, but I was just, it's not any, I'm not trying to compare myself to Charles
Right.
Dickens. It's just more
Right.
that process of really engaging your reader and taking them on a good ride, have a
Yeah.
satisfying ending. You have to have a satisfying ending. And so anyway, so that was quite an experience for me when she told me that. It made me
Wow.
really, really happy. Yeah.
You must be trying to flatter me because I love Dickens. He's one of my favorite authors, and A
Wow.
Christmas Carol is just right up there. But yeah, what Dickens is able to do to draw you in, to with the senses, he uses them all, and
Oh my
really
gosh, yeah.
can pull you in to tell a great story. Yeah, if you're gonna learn, why not learn from the best, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
What you create when it connects with someone, there's just no feeling like it,
Hmm.
whether it's I had for my I didn't expect we'd talk about Christmas so much, but on my Christmas podcast, I've had several people just share some very heartfelt things that really have touched me. And one lady shared with me a recording of her, I think it was her mother reading a story. She would read this Christmas story every year, and so they recorded it one year, and so then she sent me the recording and said, this might mean, this could be something you could play on your podcast. And of course I did. I was so honored to do that. And just to be able to share that story with others, that, that to be the
Oh
funnel of
yeah.
that. Yeah. That was something that really just kind of blew me away. Like, wow, my podcast touched you so much that you wanted to share something that touched you, and just
Yeah.
kind of keep that circle going. That was,
They were so smart to have her record it. Oh,
yeah.
to have that. Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. Well, as we get close to wrapping up here, I also like to ask just for some advice for new authors, whether it's something that you learned along the way or wish you had known when you first started.
That's interesting. I write the advice column for the Maryland Writers Association newsletter.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a quarterly newsletter. So I read a lot of advice, but I think that the main thing is be patient, be persistent, allow yourself to write badly, because some days you're going to get it right, and other days it's not going to come. But just get the story down on the page. I mean, I love the book by Elizabeth Gilbert called Big Magic. She wrote Eat, Pray, Love, and some other things,
Mm-hmm.
but this is nonfiction, and it's all about her. What she writes is that your muse is not something within you; it's something that visits you, and
Mm.
you have to be open to it when it visits you. And that's the big magic. When I mean, there are times where I'm slogging through, and then I'll hit a point where I get this great idea, and then I write and write and write and write and write, and it's like the most. It's it is the agony and the ecstasy in writing. There's the
Yeah.
agony when you're just writing and it's so bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, Anne Lamotto is told, like, allow yourself to write bad first drafts. Just let that happen. But when the big magic comes, my husband came in the room the other day and I was laughing. He was like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "Oh my God, I just wrote the best line ever." And I gave it to Ed, and he goes, "Why'd you give it to Ed?" And I'm like, just trust me, I gave it to Ed. And so just, and she even tells us a story in the book about as she was at a conference with Ann Patchett, and they were both on stage, and she talked about listening to Ann Patchett, who she says is sort of demure when you meet her, but then she gave this powerful speech. And so they hugged at the end, and they introduced themselves to each other. And when they said goodbye, they had a quick kiss. And Elizabeth Gilbert had been working on this story that had come to her in like a big magic thing about a woman going to the Amazon, and just the whole detailed story. And then she was trying to get her husband to become a legal citizen, and she lost all, she couldn't do it anymore. And so like 6 months later, she's having lunch with Ann Patchett, and she says, "Well, what are you working on right now?" And she goes, "Oh," and Ann Patchett is like, "I'm writing this story about the Amazon, and there's a woman who goes down there, and she's trying to help her boss, and she has solved some." And Elizabeth Gilbert's like, "Dude, that's not possible. I was writing that book." And she's like, well, I didn't steal it from you, I'm sure. She goes, no, it was the kiss when I passed my muse to you with the
Mm,
kiss, and it's like this great story. And it was one of her best, and had its best sellers, but she tells the story. And so I feel like you have to be open to that. If you let it go on, it'll go on to the next person and you're going to lose it. So be open to that. And the other thing is get feedback and take it in. Get a beta reader, get an editor. If you have an editor, listen, be timely, be a nice person. All that is huge. When I had my first two books came out with from Minotaur, and my editor, who was brilliant from Harvard, ended up going to another publisher in the middle of my second book. And so I was given to her assistant, who had never read my books and wasn't really able to champion them, which is what an editor is required to do to get you in a publication slot and all that stuff. And so I was orphaned again. And so I was mid-series, and I got another agent because it's really hard to sell mid-series. I don't think so. I said, well, if you would just try, I'm not done with these people yet. And so
mm-hmm.
at first she couldn't find one. And I said, okay, well, thanks for, we'll end our contract. And she goes, no, 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 why are you doing that? Write another series. And I said, I'm not done with these people. I'm not done. And she's like, well, I
Mm-hmm.
really like working with you. Like, don't. I was, it's okay, Dawn. Thank you, thank you. And then 6 months later, she called me up and she goes, I have an editor, I have a publisher for you. And I was like, oh my God. And so she called this Level Best Books, and she talked to Sean, and Sean and I had been on like 3 or 4 panels together at libraries and conferences. And Sean's like, oh my God, I love Wendy. Yes, yes, yes. And so now we're working together. But it was like, you gotta just be a nice person, and things happen. So,
Mm-hmm.
but and I take that feedback, and I get feedback from my critique group. But just they're really smart people out there, and you don't have to take it all. You don't have to change everything.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really, really important. And it's hard. It's very hard. I've worked with people who they don't, they'll send their book away to an editor and then just put it under the bed because they don't want to change it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, it's really interesting.
Talking about the muse and how it comes and goes like a visitor. It
Mm-hmm.
reminds me of Ray Bradbury. He wrote a book called Zen and the Art of Writing, which I have read like 3 or 4 times, and I'm not a writer. I just love reading it because of his,
I'll have to pick that up again.
yeah,
Yeah.
his approach to writing. In that book, it's more of a collection of his essays, but he talks about the muse being like something you can feed and tend and take care of, almost like it's an animal, and he
That's
writes
so true.
some of the most beautiful poetic sentences. It's just a delight to read, and I can apply what he says to any of my passions, whether it's
Yeah.
podcasting or I like painting, things like that. It's just
It works in childcare. It works in
yeah,
everything,
yeah,
like all of a sudden you get a perspective of your kid, and it's like, oh, I'm going to look at it that way, and everything's going to like fall into place. Yeah.
right, right. Um, yeah, I always as you're talking about that, his book came to mind. I just read it again not too long ago, and
I'm going to have to pick that up for
yeah,
sure.
yeah, it's I know I first read it when I was a teenager because he was a big favorite of mine, and I was thinking I'd like to be a writer someday or whatever, so I read it, and I was expecting like a how to write kind of lesson, but this is more of a it's a joy to write and create, and here's how I do it. And he I can't remember how he puts it now. It's something like he gets up in the morning, he gets blasted out of bed and reassembles at the typewriter, and and in a manic fury he like pounds out all these words, and he just has a way of describing it, so it's great.
That's awesome. Well, the ancient Greeks and Romans used to look at it that way too, that the muses visits you. That
Yeah.
if they nowadays we say someone is a genius, but they would say that your genius visits you also. You aren't
Hmm.
a genius. Your genius, like your muse, or will visit you, and it doesn't always stay, and then it always comes back. But it's not like someone is a genius. Their genius visited them, and they created something.
For the future, you have a Christmas mystery coming out. Is that this year, later this year?
Ideally, yes. It
Ideally,
should
okay.
be either late summer, August. August is the current pub date. It might get bumped back a little bit into the fall, but I definitely want it out before December.
Right.
So yes, yeah,
Perfect.
Killer in a Winter Wonderland. And I've been, like you mentioned, researching all these food narratives. And so I asked my editor, I said, can we do a companion cookbook? And she's like, absolutely. So that's another project. I've got to write the fifth book also, but I'm really, and it's going to be stories. I love secret family recipes, and like I have a really good friend who grew up in Switzerland, and she gave, oh my God, she can cook. She used to own a bed and breakfast, and she makes this Gruyere tart that it was her mother's recipe. That, I mean, my husband and I were fighting over it. She had a brunch and we were like eating it all. But she has this fabulous story about in Switzerland, in Zurich, in the early 20s, her grandmother or great grandmother was walking down the street. There was a tortoise walking along the street, and there are no tortoises in Switzerland. So she picked it up, took it to the police, which is what you do when you find something, and they keep it for 30 days. And if no one comes for it, they give it back to you and it's yours. And but they said with the tortoise, they said, you can just take this home with you. Well, Brigitte, as they named him, they didn't realize it was a him. Brigitte is still alive and has been passed down from family to family, and in her family, from generation to generation. And now it's with a family in Zurich. They made a whole garden for Brigitte in the summers, and in the winters she hibernates in the basement. But she's got like 50 to 100 more years to go. So each generation passes Brigitte down to the next person. And so, these little stories, I mean, I love that. And, it's a great story about Daniel's family. And anyway, so I love those kind of stories. So I want each recipe to have like a narrative with it.
Yeah.
Either about the person, the grandmother that wrote it, or that kind of thing. And my friend Carla, who's here with me, her parents are both 100% Italian. She's 100% Italian. She still goes to visit her cousins every year. And they have a secret family red sauce recipe. Neither she nor her brother ever had children. And so we were on the beach a couple of years ago here. We come here every winter and all get together. And I was plying her with champagne for her secret family red sauce, the Palumbo family secret family red sauce. And she finally like, fine, I'll give it to you. And it's on my website, and it's in Windswept Farm, but it never been written down. So she goes back to Rochester, spent 14 hours in the kitchen trying to figure out the amount of this, and all the ingredients making this red sauce. But so she gave me that. And so I have, a great narrative with that story. And it's on my website though. The Palumbo family secret Sunday red sauce. It's incredible.
Oh man. Well, I'm going to be heading off to the kitchen here real soon. So
Great.
See what I can whip up here. But Wendy, I want to thank you so much for giving me your time today and talking about your books and writing and what inspires you. Where can people find you online if they want to come and find out more about you?
My website is Wendy Sand Eckel, Eckel, author.com. And I've got a bunch of recipes on there. There's a way to sign up for my newsletter that I send out about every 2 months with a secret family recipe. I usually have writing prompts and all kinds of fun stuff. I usually have a picture of the person that gave me the recipe and a little narrative about them. And you can sign up for my newsletter, and you can contact me via email. There's a little thing you can click. And I have book trailers for all 3 books, and they're amazing. So those are on my website.
Forgot to mention, your books have really lovely cover art to them. Who does the work on that? Do you know?
At Level Best Books, it's actually my editor that does everybody's cover art. And she did a great job. The first 2, when they came out through Minotaur, were in hardback. And that's prohibitive. A lot of people don't want to pay for a hardback book. So when Level Best gave me a book deal, they agreed to put the first do a second edition for the first 2. I got the rights back from Minotaur, and they allowed that, which allowed me to tweak a few things. When you finally let go of the baby and it goes off to the press, you're like, oh man, I wish I could have changed that. So I got to do that with the first 2 books. Now they're in paperback. They changed the cover art, which Minotaur keeps the rights to the cover art. So Sean did all 3 of them, and she did an amazing job. She really did.
Absolutely. Sometimes the cover art is the unsung hero of the book. So I like to point that out.
I'm with you. I'm a very visual person, so that was important to me.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, Wendy, thank you again for joining us. And everyone, I would encourage you to go out and find her stories and read her books. I can't wait to get to them myself. And until next time, everyone, just keep reading. Thank you for listening to the Bookshelf Odyssey podcast. You can check out the show notes to find out all the information, links, in books that we referenced in today's episode. If you'd like to help support the show, I'd love for you to share on your social medias, tell your bookworm friends, share with your author friends, and help us get the word out. If you'd like to help out in a financial way, there are links in the show notes. You can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com. You can find all episodes at bookshelfodyssey.com. And please follow us on my social medias. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Follow us there for more bookish content. And so until next time, happy reading, everyone, and take care.